Mumia Abu Jamal. I'm a journalist, a husband, a father, a grandfather, and an African American. I live in the fastest growing public housing tract in America. In 1981, I was a reporter for WUHY-FM and president of the Philadelphia Association of Black Journalists. Currently, I'm a writer and public radio commentator. I've been a resident on Pennsylvania's death row for more than 15 years.
To break free is to begin to heal the broken inner self, to save the soul from dancing with shaitan.
But you see,
the battle wages on,
the battle wages beyond.
As we sit unified
in trying to identify,
minutes are ticking away and seconds fly by.
And I can hear the piercing cry for freedom and thinking twice about sparing a dime.
Signing on a petition,
posting a flyer,
speaking out for what's right,
raising her hand to question what's wrong,
and thinking twice could lose yet another life. Mumia Abu Jamal
sits framed beyond the solitary confines of his cell walls for crimes he never committed,
but instead for words he admitted, speaking out
for the silence,
teaching others,
to find strength,
fighting back
against brutality,
standing up
against injustice.
Mumia Abu Jamal,
a people's hero, sits awaiting an unwarranted execution,
signed by injustices draped in death cloths. Minutes are ticking away and seconds fly by.
Let me bring it back home.
He is innocent. Kwang Chung Kao, an innocent civilian,
Asian man,
shot to death in shady Sonoma County circumstances by brutal badgers in front of his own home.
They claimed he appeared to take a threatening martial arts stance.
Kwang Chung Kao,
father, husband, neighbor,
hero.
That was Mumia Abu Jamal. And this is Adam Carroll, the War on Immigrants Report. Happy New Year. January 1st, a new year. The upcoming year of the rat, the last year of the Bush administration, God willing, and also the 200th anniversary of when the importation of slaves, that forced immigration, was prohibited. This week we're having Chaplain James Yee, Yusuf Yee, from Guantanamo, Aziz Haq from the Brennan Center, and Bibi Khan, whose brother is in detention, as guests caught in the traps and nets of Mordor, or of the Bush administration's so-called War on Terror, speaking about the upcoming year and what we can expect to see. Families for Freedom won't be with us this week, though they are with us in spirit. They will be actually on next week. Together we will be doing a special 2-week in a row presentation of the War on Immigrants Report. So we'll be focusing next week on the escalation of raids and the escalation of the entire ICE crackdown on immigrants. First, the news. Eric Foner wrote this week in the Times, one significant milestone has gone strangely unnoticed, the 200th anniversary of January 1st, 1808, when the importation of slaves into the United States was prohibited. This neglect stands in striking contrast to the many public events in Britain that marked the 2007 bicentennial of that country's banning of the slave trade. The British campaign against the African slave trade launched the modern concern for human rights as an international principle. In the United States, however, slavery not only survived the end of the African trade, but embarked on an era of unprecedented expansion. Americans have had to look elsewhere for memories that ameliorate our racial discontents. Nevertheless, the abolition of the slave trade in the United States is well worth remembering. Only a small fraction, perhaps 5% of the estimated 11 million Africans brought to the New World in the 4 centuries of the slave trade were destined for the area that became the United States. The rest were down in Latin America and Caribbean. But in the colonial era, Southern planters regularly purchased imported slaves here in New York City. In the Constitutional Convention of 1789, South Carolina's delegates were determined to protect slavery and initiated the 3/5 Clause, giving the South extra representation in Congress. That was a compromise that also barred Congress from prohibiting the importation of slaves until 1808. So from the Constitution the first date that they could ban the importation was January 1st, 1808, which is what they did. However, southern states, especially South Carolina, did find ways around that. However, in the 19th century, free African Americans celebrated January 1st as an alternative to July 1st, when, in their views, patriotic orators hypocritically proclaimed the slave-owning states a land of liberty. So, happy January 1st. Another sad story from Immigration News Briefs, which you can be found at immigratennewsbriefs.blogspot.com. Detainee killed in workplace accident. On December 5th, Cesar Gonzalez Baeza, Mexican immigration detainee at the Mira Loma Detention Center in Lancaster, California, was electrocuted when the jackhammer he was using struck a high-voltage power line. The accident took place while Baeza and another detainee were moving fence posts as part of a voluntary program that allows detainees to earn $1 a day or extra visiting hours in exchange for performing kitchen, janitorial, or other light work. A Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department and Department of Homeland Security are investigating the deaths. They declined to comment on why Baeza was working with a jackhammer. Greg Moreno, an attorney for Baeza's family, said, "We want to know who was supervising this work and how it was that no one knew about the power line." Gonzalez Baeza, a permanent legal resident, had been picked up on a traffic violation and detained for 10 months while appealing his deportation, Moreno said. "This shouldn't have happened," Moreno said. "This is a man who should have been bonded out. He was a hardworking man, a father of 2 young boys. He wasn't a threat to society or anyone else, and now he is dead." Third item today is the ICE chief. The new immigration chief, Julie Myers, was confirmed by the Senate December 19th, 2 years after President George W. Bush used a recess appointment to assign her to the position. Myers was among more than 30 people whose appointments were approved by a voice vote of the Senate as it concluded its session before the holidays. Her appointment was questioned recently after she gave the Most Original Costume Award to a white employee who came to the ICE Halloween party dressed as an escaped prisoner with dreadlocks and darkened skin. Myers apologized for the incident. On January 1st, Arizona intends to become the first state to try to muscle its way out of immigration problems on its own, according to the New York Times editorial of December 18th. That is when it begins to enforce a new state law that harshly punishes businesses that knowingly hire undocumented immigrants. It is a 2-strike law, suspending a business's license on the first offense and revoking it on the second. It is the strictest workplace enforcement law in the country. The boosters of the Arizona law, including the Minutemen border vigilantes, who have made January 1st an anti-immigrant rallying cry, have a narrow goal: the biggest purge of illegal immigrants in the Southwest since the federal government's Operation Wetback in 1954. There's going to be quite a large economic impact of this law, observes the New York Times. There is no way for Arizona or any other state to get businesses back on a legal footing without exacting a great economic and human toll. Petitions for the Minutemen's stricter initiative are being collected as we speak. As Arizona exacts its punishment on the undocumented workers that have made it so prosperous, it runs the risk of proving itself tough but not so smart. Do we have someone on the line yet? Yeah, okay. Well, then I'm going to move on and mention that the crackdown on Muslims as well as immigrants is ongoing, as you all know. And recently, Mike Huckabee, who originally had supported financial aid for illegal immigrant students, so-called, but he has now done a backflip, unveiling his Secure America plan that would require the expulsion of all illegal immigrants within 120 days. I don't know how he's going to do that. And Rudy Giuliani and all the other Republican candidates especially are competing to see who can be the most anti-immigrant, even now that Tancredo has dropped out. Last week, after the assassination of Benazir Bhutto in Pakistan, he used the turmoil in Pakistan as an argument for building a border fence. Huckabee said that the United States needed to watch whether there's any unusual activity of Pakistanis coming into the country. So that said, I think we're looking forward at a year that will see renewed paranoia about Muslims as well as immigrants. I have on the line Chaplain James Yee, who served in Guantanamo and who went through a great deal of, well, I'll let him tell it. I think his name is pretty well known. And Salam alaikum, are you there?
Yes, walaikum salam, I'm here.
How are you?
Fine.
Good.
Pleasure to be here today.
Thank you, thanks. Yeah, it's good. I know that since your release from detention, you've been crossing the country, speaking out to various communities, and I think it's a great example for everyone of how to turn yourself around after really a lot of setbacks and a lot of persecution. Maybe we should just go back to remind people about what exactly happened. You were working in Guantanamo. You had joined the military, I understand, learned Arabic, and you were in the position of the Muslim chaplain for the Guantanamo detainees. What year was that?
That was in late 2002 and for most of 2003, a time when most of the outrageous abuses of prisoners occurred.
And what kind of conditions did you observe, and how was it like? What was it like to work in those conditions?
Yeah, the conditions down in Guantanamo at that time were extremely dire, and really there are no really words that can really describe the horrors of how these prisoners are being treated. But there's so much documentation out in the public now that has described, just how awful these prisoners were being treated.
Right, and it's still going on, though I understand that the numbers have decreased. But still, there are various levels of security or strictness, harshness. And were you working in the maximum side or in the minimum security side?
I had almost unfettered access to essentially almost all of the prisoners in Guantanamo, with the exception of a very few, regardless of where they were being held and what facilities at Guantanamo. That ranged from being in the cage cell-like facility of Camp Delta to the more isolated facilities of Camp Echo to even Camp Iguana, which housed prisoners who were as young as 12 to 14 years old.
And what effect did you observe, on the prisoners? How were they coping with that? I mean, I realize that's several years ago, and many of them are still there. But at that time,
yeah, this January 11th, Guantanamo Bay will be moving into its 7th year of existence. But that first year or so that the prisoners were there still had extreme effect on many of the prisoners' psychological, emotional, and mental state. Many of them were far beyond being depressed and despondent. There at the time when I was there was even a dedicated cell block, which was converted into a makeshift psychiatric ward that had a team of U.S. military psychiatric technicians and physicians, 17 of them. So that's an indication that really the conditions of Guantanamo really had a harmful effect on these prisoners.
And I realize that even providing happy meals to complacent or cooperative detainees does not make up for the stress of indefinite detention. And your own situation, your own experience was basically that there was some suspicion that arose among certain people, and you ended up shackled and detained yourself, charged with espionage. Is that correct?
Well, yeah. As the chaplain in Guantanamo, I became aware of the enormous amounts of abuse and the horrible conditions of Guantanamo, and I raised concerns about these issues. Mm-hmm. As a result, this is what raised the suspicion. And being a Muslim American and Chinese American myself, it made it very easy for these individuals to target me. And then I myself would be arrested, thrown in prison, treated much like an enemy combatant, subjected to sensory deprivation, eventually accused very openly in the media and by the U.S. government of very heinous capital crimes like spying, espionage, and aiding the enemy. And indeed, I was even threatened with the death penalty. I suffered for 76 days in isolation, eventually to be released and cleared of all criminal charges, after which I would resign my commission from the U.S. military and even receive an honorable discharge.
That must have been very rough on you and your family. Did they know what was going on during this period? Hello? Uh-oh. Hello? I think we may have lost him. If so, we'll try to call him back in a minute. I'll use this moment to say that on January 11th, on this anniversary, as we move into the 7th year of the Guantanamo obscenity, there will be a series of demonstrations around the country. One is in Washington, which is organized by Witness Against Torture. The Catholic workers and other groups are organizing that. I can give you some websites to check that out. Last January 11th, in fact, 500 people attended that and 88 were arrested. And they took the names of the men in Guantanamo instead of giving their own identity. And so now those men's names are recorded in the U.S. Legal system, which is an interesting tactic to get these disappeared men back within the rule of law in a symbolic way. WitnessTorture.org is a source of information about that. WitnessTorture.org. I think it's HTTP without the www, but that may not matter. Then in New York, there is a vigil against torture on January 11th also. The 6th anniversary, or I think the 6th year has passed. In any case, the theme is say no more to indefinite detentions, to inhumane and degrading treatment, to lack of fair trials, to torture. There will be a Jummah, Friday prayers, with Imam Talib and others, followed by an interfaith vigil with Reverend Donna Shepper of Judson Memorial Church, Andrew Saperstein from Evangelicals for Human Rights, Hassan al-Menyawi of University of Peace and former, apparently a rendered detainee. I don't know his full story. Rabbi Michael Feinberg from Labor Religion Coalition and others. And for more information, you can contact Father Mark Hallinan at 917-853-7137 or the website www.nyrcat.org. That's www.nyrcat.org. I think we're still trying to get Chaplain Yee back. Maybe the cell phone backup might work if the other one isn't. I don't know what happened. That was very sinister. But Chaplain Yee is available for speaking, I know, and there probably a Google search can find out how to get him to be part of this. But I hope that listeners will seriously try to attend these January 11th events. And again, the one in New York is at Foley Square. All right, we've got Brother Yee back. Assalamu alaikum. Are you back?
Yes, okay, great.
Oh, you disappeared.
Yeah, when we talk about these types of issues, it's very often my cell phone blanks out.
Yes, I think that happens. Yeah, well, we were talking about your situation. You had been detained for 76 days, shackled and threatened. At the end of it, and I know you've written a book, which is very worth reading, but at the end of this ordeal, they tried to smear you personally as well. It's interesting, though, that by trying to hurt your reputation, by doing these other things, the United States has hurt its own reputation in the whole world. And Guantanamo, everyone knows about that, and it's really had repercussions against United States interests, not only human interests. So this has been a disaster in many ways. But as far as getting back to your own release, you are a citizen, is that correct?
Yeah, correct. I'm a American-born, third-generation Chinese American.
Right, and you were held down in a brig, the naval brig, and where is that?
I was held in the Consolidated Naval Brig in Charleston, South Carolina.
And I understand that there are still some other people held there, at least one.
Yeah, at the time I was being held there were 3 other enemy combatants that were being held there. 2 of them are no longer being held in that prison, but there's still one who is considered by the U.S. administration to be an enemy combatant. He is a non-U.S. citizen, but a legal resident of the United States, and he's been held there since December, I believe, or January of 2002. That'll be part of the 2008 presidential campaigns.
Yes, and in fact we have. But how is that going? How is your role?
My email address is the word justice, JUSTICE,